All right. Todd, how's it going?
John, what's the image that you had on your screensaver? The monster in a tie. Who was that
Oh,
guy?
that's our little mascot.
I like him a lot.
Yeah. It's kind of like, inspired by Godzilla, Nerd Reactor, whole thing. Yeah.
Nerd Reactor, roll out.
Bonhoeffer. Big month for you, right?
A big month for me. Yes, we're talking about it, which is always good. When something's in the news, it means people are paying attention, and Dietrich Bonhoeffer certainly deserves full attention.
Yeah. And Dietrich, he's a figure that I'm not too privy about, and until after watching it, and I'm like reading just more about him on like Wikipedia. And so for you, like, what was Bonhoeffer like to you, like in terms of just how it all started?
Well, he was a guy that I'd read when I was in my early 20s and then not really paid any attention to for the next 30 years. He was a name, it's just sort of a famous name, but I didn't attach it to any particular thinking. And then this movie was brought to me and everything changed. I met this guy and it was good that I met him in my 50s because I don't think I would have been ready to meet him in my 20s. He just represented a kind of fierce bravery that was deeply inspirational and also made me look in the mirror and say, am I living a fully brave life? And what does that look like in this day and age? He knew who he was fighting. He was fighting Hitler, but how can I stand up for the truth? And how can I stand up for the marginalized and for the others in the same way that Dietrich did? How can I do that now? And asking that question has been very galvanizing for me. It's definitely lit a fire under my butt.
Yeah, and I think with watching this movie, because there's so much media about Nazi Hitler, World War II in terms of like the war on different fronts, and we don't really get to see much about like through media how Hitler has affected Germany, like especially through the churches. And this movie, I think like we get to see that like, oh, it's the Nazification of the churches, and then you have Bonhoeffer trying to fight against that. So what was that like trying to capture that part of history?
Well, it was exciting to tell the story because I'd never heard it before. And what I find as I hadn't thought it through before, but in America, we don't really study anything that happened in World War II before we got involved. I mean, we might talk about it in the abstract, but there's no deep dive. And getting to see up close what was happening in Germany and how Hitler, though not a man of faith, the first thing he did when he came to power was take over the churches. And it was not a spiritual choice. It was a power move. And he was very savvy. Now, at that point, the churches didn't know the darkness of the plans that Hitler had to take over everything. But they were quick, as it says in the movie, to trade full pews for full hearts. And the churches were part of the reviving of the German nation that had been in the shadows since World War One. And they got very excited about this guy who seemed to be on their side. So while they were standing right there, they got their pockets picked. He removed all the crucifixes and put up swastikas in the church. He removed the Bible and he put in Mein Kampf. It sounds so cartoony and bizarre that it can't be possible, but it happened.
Yeah, that's scary, especially during that time, just seeing how the changes happen, and then next thing you know, oh my God, where how did we get to this,
Great
And
question, John.
yeah,
That's it. How did we get to this? And we are in a moment in history right now where we need to really ask that. Now, I'm not saying we're on the verge of becoming Nazi Germany. What I'm saying is we're so overwhelmed by the noise of our culture. We're so overwhelmed by our lives, and we're so locked in whatever bubble we're in, where we just have closed fists and we're throwing Molotov cocktails at each other from one side to the other, that we're turning into rigid statues, and we're losing our humanity, and we're losing our love for our fellow human being. And we need to know, okay, how did we get here? Obviously, technology has played a huge part. Things have isolated us further and further. We don't need to leave the house because we have streaming. We don't need to ever look up. I mean, our children are walking around with broken necks because they're bent over looking at their phone all the time. We think we're connected, but we're isolated. These things are there's a straight line between all that and the situation we're in politically, and that two sides of the aisle don't want to have anything to do with one another. There's no convergence in the middle. There's no overlap in our shared humanity. This is very dangerous because as soon as you limit another person's humanity, as soon as they become a series of descriptions that you have for them, that's othering. And when you other, you demean the other person's humanity. And if they're less than human, you don't mind when they suffer. And this is how fascism rises, how people wind up in detention centers. It's happened again and again in the history of the world. And we need to be aware right now how this happened and what we can do about it.
Yeah. Just trying to just treat each other like human beings, you know? It's like sometimes I don't people are like, yeah, it's yeah, people can be people. So I was like watching and I was wondering what the when creating this Bonhoeffer directing it, what were the creative liberties in this? If there were any, and what's an example?
Yeah, so the only liberties I would say, I'll give you one that was because I needed the spiritual metaphor. And then two, this just happens with every biopic. You need to have some fluidity of the calendar. If something happened in 1940, but for the purposes of the movie's drama needs to happen in 1939, then it needs to happen in 1939. As long as it's true and it happened, we have to keep the movie entertaining. It's not a documentary series, 6 hours that you can lay in every detail. So that's something, and that happens in every movie. It happened in Sully, Professor and the Madman, all these true stories that I've written. You need to have some fluidity with the calendar. But something that didn't happen, I wrote and I kept in the movie because it could have happened. And whether it happened or not, this spiritual metaphor was alive in Dietrich's life. And that is the scene where Dietrich plays piano with Louis Armstrong at the jazz club. So here's what the facts were. He was living in Harlem and he was introduced to jazz by his best friend, Frank Fisher. And they went to Small's Paradise Club a lot. All of that is fact. Louis Armstrong played at Small's Paradise Club a lot. That is also fact. Whether they were in the building at the same time, most likely. I don't know for sure, but most likely. The other thing is seeing jazz brought Dietrich's music back to him because he had stopped playing after the death of his brother. So he hadn't played piano since he was, 9 or 10. And suddenly he wanted to play piano again. Music was brought back to life because of jazz. And the connection between the Black community and jazz and Dietrich and Europe and classical music, I thought if these guys can play music together, because he and Frank became best friends, if they can play music together, then we have that spiritual bridge where people are understanding each other on a deeper level. And therefore, Dietrich can see the world in a different way. And so I have Louis Armstrong and Dietrich Bonhoeffer playing jazz together.
Oh yeah, that's a good like just message or metaphor in terms of just two different cultures just coming together and making something together. And
That's
for
it.
this, yeah, this movie, I feel like, because there's a lot of history with Bonhoeffer. So what was it like trying to like figure out which elements of his life you wanted to incorporate?
Yeah, he had a big life. And the original assembly of this movie after we shot it before I was started to edit it was 2 hours and 52 minutes. And the movie is now 2 hours and 6 minutes before credits. So that's, more than 45 minutes that I shot that I liked that's not in the movie. So what I find is the story has its own rhythm. It begins to tell you when something is over, when a scene is over, how it goes into the next scene, whether that scene should even be in there. Have I explained something really clearly in an earlier scene that makes a later scene redundant? So that's the question you're asking all the time as you try to get a, a shorter runtime. I'm glad I was able to cut it down. I don't feel like I'm missing anything that's not in the film. metaphorically, spiritually. I feel like I got his whole story in there. But there was a treasure trove to grab. His family life, his youth, his connection to how loved he was, his not staying in New York when he could have saved his life, the the fearlessness and relentlessness that he showed in being against Hitler from the start for 12 straight years. So I feel like it's all in there. The movie is you get a full meal with this movie, but you won't leave overstuffed.
No, yeah. And I'm not sure how I'm doing on time, but I'm gonna ask you the last question, especially with the whole well, the last might be a spoiler because well, it's what he said about like silence in the face of evil is itself evil. And with that, like we've had like different variations of that, like that saying of how like, if good men do nothing and then evil will rise.
Yeah, Edmund Burke.
Uh
Yeah, yeah.
yeah. So how do you feel about like just that line and how it's gonna hoping to inspire people?
If we're not doing something on behalf of our fellow man, because everybody around you is in need, everybody around you is in some shape where they need to be encouraged, they need to be lifted up, some people need to be rescued. Often it's us that needs rescue. If we look up and there's no one that's there for us, like how are we going to make it? So this is a moment where we can have the true revolution, and the true revolution is love. The one unstoppable weapon in the history of the world is love, because it does the thing we need. It disarms. Just you hear a story about someone that you've met, and they surprise you with their kindness or compassion, and you say, "Oh, it was so disarming." It disarms. Let's lay down the weapons we keep grabbing. Sometimes it's a Bible, sometimes it's a gun, sometimes it's a fist. Let's lay down our weapons. Let's disarm in the face of being loved and loving.
Yeah. And yeah, it's I feel like this movie's it's a good time to come around like during the holidays, and I feel people's gonna just get enlightened and learn more about Dietrich, and feel like just a lot of stuff to learn about him. And because right now I'm gonna be watching his documentary just to find out more about him, and I think that's what this movie does. Just makes me want to learn more about this person who actually, in the face of evil Nazi, and tries to fight that. And much appreciated, Todd, for taking on this project. And yeah, can't wait for everyone else to watch it.
Thank you, John. Thank you for your time and your thoughtful questions. I really appreciate you.